Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to look at the 10 most incredible recent archaeological discoveries. Um, as everybody knows, archaeology is kind of the backbone of a lot of especially older ancient history. Some of the sources are kind of up in the air, right? You have people say like Herodotus, right? Or even Homer, if you want to go back that far, where historians think they're getting a broad general truth with a lot of biases and, you know, a lot of stuff that is probably not as truthful, right? So archaeology really fills in a lot of these gaps. It's a huge, huge part of especially older history, and it's something that I actually really, really enjoy. Um, every time there's new major archaeological finds, I try to stay up with it as well as I can, but I have no idea what these are going to be over, so I'm curious to see what they say. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10, the Lost City of Colombia. Ciudad Perdida, the Lost City of Colombia, is more ancient and arguably more mysterious than Machu Picchu in Peru, yet not many people have heard of it. Ciudad Perdida is hidden deep inside the jungle of the Sierra Nevada. This is an area of tall mountains, dense forests, and history dating back thousands of years. The lost city was originally founded by the mighty Tairona people who ruled the region of Colombia's Caribbean coast. They are remembered for their architectural marvels, advanced engineering knowledge, and elaborate gold objects they left behind. The Tairona had total control of the region up until the Spanish invasion. While both Ciudad Perdida and Machu Picchu were both hidden way up in the mountains, Ciudad Perdida is 600 years older than Machu Picchu. It's also much harder to reach, and there are no trains or tourist buses. The only way to reach this strange place is by traveling up the coast to Santa Marta and then making your perilous journey into the bush. Ciudad Perdida was also discovered fairly recently in the 1970s, but the location is complicated. As recently as 2003, a group of tourists were kidnapped while on their way to this lost city in the jungle. They were held hostage for 100 days, making this place hard to get to and risky for explorers. But if you do ever make the trek, you would be in for a great adventure. Number 9. A
Especially for some of the old civilizations, like some of them make total sense, right? I mean, a lot of them do. You see a place like Egypt, right, where it makes total sense that you would have really, really old civilizations there because of the way that the Nile works and because of the flooding and basically it being really well suited to host large amounts of people. Um, then there are other places where that really does not, it really doesn't make a ton of sense, where like the soil quality is garbage, or it's extremely mountainous, and so sometimes there's this, like, I'll give you an example. There is a an old civilization in the Amazons that has kind of been argued back and forth about, and up till recently was kind of considered to be maybe a little bit more myth than reality. And a big reason for that is because the thought process was nothing will grow in this soil, so there's really no way that a large amount of people that could actually form a civilization could be here, because how would they get enough food to survive having a civilization here? And so it's really kind of interesting to look at and kind of speculate, how did places like that survive, right? Where it's not like in Egypt or like 100 other different places around the globe that seem extremely conducive to human life.
well from the Stone Age. In the Czech Republic, archaeologists came across an ancient well that they believe to be the oldest wooden structure in the world. It was discovered in East Bohemia, near the small town of Ostrov. While construction of a new highway was underway near the town, they came across the wooden timbers of the well, and archaeologists were called in to investigate. Excavations revealed a small wooden box that once lined the walls of the well. It was not that large, only about 2.5 by 2.5 feet. But it was an authentic wooden structure from the Stone Age. The reason it's so shocking is that it came from the Neolithic period, sometime around the year 5255 BC. That's over 7,000 years ago, confirmed using dendrochronological
In case you aren't great with math.
dating techniques and measuring rings in the wooden planks. Were there older wooden structures in the world? In all likelihood, yes. But wood doesn't survive very well, which is why most archaeological evidence comes in the form of stone and metal. This is the oldest wooden structure that's been found in Europe, and it can be traced back to a time when farming was a new invention. The well is critical to showing exactly when farmers first came around, because that's the only reason a well would have been needed. 7,000 years ago, somebody dug a hole in the ground, figured out how to bring water out of it, and settled their very own farm. For all we know, this small chunk of land in East Bohemia could have been one of the first farms in the world. Would you rather be a farmer or a hunter if you lived during the Stone Age? Let me know in the comments. Number 8. The Denmark Pyramid.
Okay, so it's hard to pinpoint something like the first farm or the first couple of farms. Um, Yeah, that's something that I'm not even really sure how you could possibly narrow something like that down. And these are all, in general, all of history is kind of subject to a little bit of moving, right? Because sometimes we find things, especially archaeological things, we'll find things that don't totally make sense with the precise picture we think we have of a civilization or group or time period or whatever. And so things are going to kind of have to shift around in order for this to make sense, right? Um, I'm not really sure how you could pinpoint farm, but it is interesting because wood is, right, like it is a miracle that that has survived this long. You know, I have wood in my backyard right now that's like a month old. That's already warping and all messed up. So it really is kind of incredible that it lasted that long. And how interesting that I'd be curious I would want to know everything about that. Everything about it. How deep it was, you know, as specifically where it was located in terms of the surrounding area. That would be a super interesting find to me, because it's just so old, right? It's so old, and a lot of technologies haven't changed a ton over time. Obviously, there are some that have changed astronomically, but some haven't changed a ton. But I would be really interested to kind of see everything about that well.
Archaeologists recently discovered evidence that Stone Age people built a megalithic labyrinth in Denmark. They've discovered a large enclosure near Stevens, but they can't figure out exactly what its purpose was. Professionals with the museum Southeast Denmark were the ones to discover the palisade enclosures, a sort of fence framing of an oval area from the Neolithic period. Pernille Sloth, the leader of the excavation, said it was overwhelming when he and his team realized they were standing in the center of something enormous. When trying to figure out what they were dealing with, researchers looked to the few scraps of remaining fencing. The fence was constructed in 5 rows extending outwards, but the openings in each row of fencing are offset, and the design was likely on purpose. In other words, you couldn't simply walk straight through each row of fencing. You would have walked into one and then had to turn left or right and find the next entry into the second layer. Sounds kind of like a labyrinth if you ask me, and the researchers agree. It could be there was nothing here except a maze, a very primitive labyrinth built thousands of years ago for some unknown purpose. Even though researchers believe it could be a labyrinth, that's as far as their theory goes. The why and how are anyone's guess. What's your guess? Let me know in the comments below. Number 7.
That's actually sort of hilarious that they were just like, yeah, it looks like a maze. Like, I don't know, that seems well, it seems like if you looked at it, because seriously, if you just went and asked any random person off the street, like, hey, what does this look like? Or even just a drawing of it, they would be like, yeah, it looks like a maze. Normally, the researchers' ideas or the archaeologists' ideas of what old structures are literally things that normal people would never even think about. So it's kind of hilarious that they're just like, yeah, it looks like a maze to me.
Ancient mask in Argentina. In 2005, residents of a small Argentinian village came across human bones jutting out from the ground like the broken ribs of a ship. It was pretty terrifying, but the villagers couldn't help their curiosity. They started looking around and sifting through the dirt, and that was when they found an amazing copper mask. The mask was flat, a little curved on the inside, and had eye holes, a nose hole, and a mouth hole. It also happened to be 3,000 years old, making it one of the oldest metal objects to ever be found in South America. When you're dealing with the oldest of anything, there's bound to be some mystery and confusion. In this case, researchers say the mask could be evidence that a mysterious population in Argentina learned how to work metal before the pre-Inca cultures of Peru. Even though humans in Peru were fashioning things out of gold 4,000 years ago, copper wasn't used. At least, not until after this Argentinian mask was made. It's difficult to definitively say one culture did one thing first. Complex metalworking was born in Peru and Argentina right around the same time, although nobody can say which culture was the first to master it. Whatever the case, the mask is still exceptional. And to make it even more mysterious, the mask is over 1,000 years older than the place where it was found. Nobody knows how it got there, who made it, or what in the world it could have been used for. Any ideas? Number 6. Ancient tattoos.
That's interesting. I'm wondering if it could have been. So it's common in with ancient civilizations that when you conquered somewhere, so like where they found the stele of Hammurabi was nowhere near where it should have been located historically, right? Well, it's because it was taken. I believe that's what it was. It was taken in conquest and taken back. Um, that's super common in ancient cultures. You go on conquest. If you win, you take anything valuable, slaves. A lot of times they'll sow salt in the ground if they've really got a bone to pick and stuff like that. So if it's way out of the region where it should be, that could potentially be a reason for it. Um, as far as the timing on the metalworking, it seems odd to me that you would have Peruvians using metallurgy with gold and not copper if there's copper in in an essentially for a next door neighbor has copper. So that seems kind of odd to me. I'm curious if maybe we don't have a full enough picture for it to make sense because that seems a little bit off to me.
Ancient tattoos. A set of very tiny combs from the Polynesian kingdom of Tonga could very well be the oldest tattoo kits in the world. The tools, itty-bitty combs made from human bone, were sitting in a storage facility at a university in Australia for decades before a team of researchers pulled them out for an investigation. They reassessed the artifacts and were able to date them as being 2,700 years old. Now, what you may not know is that tattooing goes back to the very beginning of human civilization. We have archaeological proof from ancient mummies discovered from Siberia to Egypt that people tattooed themselves. Even Otzi the Iceman, the famous frozen caveman discovered in the Alps 5,000 years ago, was found with dozens of tattoos. The people of Oceania also tattooed themselves, but because of the hot and wet climate of Polynesia, nobody's skin has survived from ancient times for archaeologists to see the evidence for themselves. But here's the thing. Since 2016, scientists have begun to find tools for tattooing. In the Solomon Islands, volcanic glass tools that may have been used for tattooing were found to be 3,000 years old. Turkey bones in the grave of a Native American in Tennessee were dated to be 3,600 years old and were found to be stained with ink. The point is that tattooing has been important in just about every culture across the planet. And while tattooing has been around since the Stone Age, these bone combs are the oldest complete tool sets ever found. And now for number 5. But first, want to say a big thank you to Kyle Oliveros. Number
That's actually interesting. So, tattoos are extremely common basically all over the place in any time period, any culture for the most part. Um, I guess, yeah, you wouldn't have. That's interesting that they had literally no evidence for it. But surely the assumption had to be that they existed, right? I mean, the assumption is that it exists basically everywhere through all time. So, um, but man, that's an old kit to find.
Number 5. The Falcon Emblem. Anne Boleyn married King Henry VIII in the year 1533,
Oh, look, she's got her head.
triggering a series of events that changed the English monarchy forever. The marriage brought about what we call today the English Reformation.
Man, he is a big boy, especially later in life. That is triple C thick boy right there.
Altering the history of the empire. After Henry's first wife, Queen Catherine of Aragon, died in 1536, Anne became queen. 1 month
Yeah, he makes a small run through wives in his life.
later, she had her third miscarriage, and later that year in May, she was arrested on charges of adultery and incest and then executed. She could not give the king a male heir, which ultimately got her killed. But it was her death that resulted in her daughter becoming Queen Elizabeth I in 1558 and ending England's Tudor dynasty. Queen Elizabeth marked the split between England and the Roman Church. It may seem like a small thing, but Anne Boleyn did change history. Just recently, historians came across one of Anne's emblems, a small white and gold bird holding a scepter and perched on a bouquet of roses. It was discovered underneath a thick layer of grime and black paint at Hampton Court Palace, sold at an auction for about $100 in 2019. It was thought to just be some ordinary decoration
Wow.
that had once been in the palace, but was later identified as Anne's very own 16th century badge. It was something that probably adorned her private apartment. It was likely removed and tossed in the trash after the king ordered her execution, only to be found over 500 years later. Its actual worth is 2,700 times more than what it auctioned for. What would you pay for this pendant? Let me know in the comments below. Number
Man, that one was crazy. With regards to Queen Elizabeth and the break from the break from the church happened under Henry. It's sort of complicated, but the initial break and the Pope being pulled from the head of the church in England happened under King Henry VIII. I'm pretty sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm like 99% sure that was the case. And I know that there's a whole thing with Queen Elizabeth and the church. The church is really complicated at this time in history. But I'm 99% sure that break happened under King Henry VIII.
4. Secret tunnel under Pompeii. Archaeologists found the remains of an ancient military horse entombed like a statue in the Italian city of Pompeii, buried and solidified in volcanic ash. But what's even more incredible is that the discovery was made by authorities who had been alerted to illegal excavations. Tomb raiders had been trying to pillage Pompeii and steal artifacts. They had dug their tunnel to get into the archaeological park. When authorities realized what was happening, they journeyed into the secret tunnel and followed it to a stable north of Pompeii, where they found the fossilized remains of a rich family's horse. The thieves had their base camp inside a villa on the outer edge of the Pompeii Archaeological Park, in an area that researchers have been neglecting. It was only by following the trail of thieves that archaeologists found it. But what makes the villa so unique is that despite being covered in volcanic ash, it was occupied again some years after the eruption. It's the first sign archaeologists have that people return to Pompeii, or at least its fringes, and continue to live and farm. Why do you think people would return to Pompeii after such destruction? Let me know your guess in the comments. Number 3.
Because of the soil, probably.
The jaguar and the starfish. At the Templo Mayor in central Mexico City, part of what was once the great capital of Tenochtitlan, archaeologists with Mexico's National Institute of Archaeology and History made a fascinating discovery. They found evidence of an ancient Aztec ritual involving starfish and a jaguar. The archaeologists
What?
found about 160 starfish in total, hidden under a thin layer of soil inside an altar within the temple. At first, they thought the starfish were small white stones, but quickly realized the stones were bones. They all belonged to the same species, the chocolate chip starfish, and they were probably offerings for the two-sided god that represented fire and water and agriculture and war. Archaeologist Miguel Baez Perez believes these particular starfish were chosen as sacrifices because of their similarity to the jaguar. The pattern on the starfish looks quite similar to the pattern on a jaguar, and so the Aztecs may have seen some correlation between the two. They brought all those starfish into the depths of the temple along with a huge jaguar and killed them all in the name of their two-faced god right at the foot of the altar. Would you ever visit a site where sacrifices were performed, or would it be too creepy? Let me know. Number 2.
There were far, far worse sacrifices performed than that one. I would absolutely go to a place where sacrifices were performed. Um, I would love to see all of that stuff. I have not been to South America. I think it would be awesome. I have family members that have gone and have seen all kinds of really really cool stuff. I've had a professor who has obviously he went and showed me all of this stuff, all of these pictures of these incredible sites that they went to. But yeah, I would definitely go.
Ancient sacred pool. On the Phoenician island of Motia, just off the coast of Sicily, archaeologists have identified an ancient sacred pool that was once aligned perfectly with the stars and the sky. These days, Motia goes by the modern name of San Pantaleo Island, but around 2,500 years ago, it was a Phoenician port city that grew rich from maritime trade. During the first excavations in the
So all of Phoenician port cities grew rich from maritime trade. Basically, that's what they did.
1920s, archaeologists misidentified an artificial basin as being a military harbor. It turns out the artificial basin was a pool constructed in 550 BC, just after the city was attacked by Carthage. It was a centerpiece, the heart of an enormous religious sanctuary that has since been utterly destroyed. The pool, called the Sacred Pool of Kothon, was part of a huge temple dedicated to the old Mesopotamian god Baal. It even had an enormous statue erected on a platform right in the middle of the pool, depicting Baal himself. But it gets even better. As archaeologists excavated the site over the last 10 years, they found more and more evidence of cult activity. Temples, altars, evidence of offerings, pedestals with shattered statues, everything suggesting Motia was once the biggest cultic complex in the Mediterranean. This wasn't just a
Wow.
port city, it was a religious island of fanatical cult members who aligned their buildings with the stars. They constructed their temples to be filled with light during the solstices, and when they weren't trading or building, they spent their days worshipping Baal. Number 1. Human Bone Amulet. A mysterious bone amulet was recently excavated from a Bronze Age grave in Siberia. The grave was likely made by the Tagar culture, who lived on the Siberian steppe up until the Iron Age, between the 8th century and the 2nd century BC. These were some of the most proficient bronze smelters in all of Eurasia. They lived at the same time as the nomadic Scythians, who dominated the region north of the Black Sea and were sandwiched between the Karasuk and Tashtik cultures. The end of the Bronze Age was a time of great change in Siberia and Central Asia when cultures rose and
Yeah, the end of the Bronze Age was bad news bears for basically every major civilization on that side of the world at the time.
fell as quickly as the winds changed. Only a few hundred Tagar burials have ever been found and recorded. They're usually filled with skeletons and bronze artifacts. The bone amulet is the only one of its kind ever uncovered from a Tagar grave. It was found inside an enclosure with 4 human bodies, the skull of a horse, a bronze mirror, pottery vessels, a random chunk of meat, and the carcasses of a calf and a sheep. The amulet itself was mostly made of bronze, with a human bone fragment in its center. It was also decorated with threaded tubular bronze and one very large tusk from a boar. It's one of a kind, and nobody knows what it was used for. Archaeologists suspect it probably had some kind of magical purpose, meaning the woman buried with the amulet may have been some kind of sorceress. Sadly, the Tagar just didn't leave behind enough information for us to piece this one together. Thanks.
Okay, so that was 10 most incredible recent archaeological discoveries. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, imagine the stuff that is still around, buried somewhere or in the ocean or, that we haven't found. But the thing that always kills me is we're so destructive. There's this idea that we're super destructive now, which, we kind of are, but historically we're so destructive that a lot of these civilizations have been burned, and the civilization that came next was conquered and burned, and there's no telling how much stuff has been lost to time, to war, to famine. It's really kind of crazy to think about. But that was a great one. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I will have the next part of the Midway series out tomorrow, and I'll see you all next time.